Yo guys, just wanted to say thank you so much for watching the video, and don't forget, let them cook.
Just since we're admitting things, can you admit to something?
I admit that, sometimes, when I'm lonely, I like to write poetry and such.
Just since we're
Yes.
just since we're sitting here admitting to things, why don't you admit to something?
My dad walked in on me when I was touching the dog, and my family just plays it off as nothing happened.
Just since we're admitting to things, can you admit to something?
It was me that kidnapped Madeline McCann.
Just since we're admitting to things, can you admit something for me?
Witchcraft is sexy.
Since we're admitting things, what are you admitting?
When I once got kidnapped by Polo G, and he shoved graham crackers up my butthole, and he drugged me, and then I woke up in the middle of the woods, and that's all I know. That's all I'll admit now.
Just since we're admitting to things, do you want to admit to something?
Nah, I think I'm good.
Just since we're
Okay,
admitting things,
thought long. I have to admit sometimes when I take my socks off, smell them before I wash them.
just since we're admitting things, why don't you admit to something?
My tablet does not want to work anymore, so I can't really draw, right? So now I'm like trying to ask my clients, hey, can you give the money in advance? Because like I can't do the work that you want me to do, right? And then like fucking, I don't know, my brain is back into that mindset of they just want my attention, nothing else. They don't care what I feel. They actually don't care what I feel. And I'm in that mindset, and I'm trying to get rid of it. I can't.
Since we're admitting things, right? That's just since we're sitting around admitting to things.
It's like,
Can you admit to something?
I do art, I guess.
Just since we're admitting to things, can you admit to something?
I should have gone to work today, but I didn't.
Just since we're admitting to things, why don't you admit to something?
That I really enjoyed, like the first time I tried the Lovin's.
I forgot where you're from, Loki.
You might remember me after this. Just since we're admitting things, why don't you admit
Oh,
something?
you rat bastard.
Do you remember me now?
Since we're admitting things, I didn't remember where I knew you from till now.
You remember
Yeah.
me now, right? Since we're admitting things.
Yeah,
So what do you have to admit?
yeah. Since we're admitting things, we probably should admit I was behind 9/11.
No, Aaron. Just since we're admitting things.
No, I'm good, bro. I'm good, bro. I'm good.
Just since we're admitting to things, why don't you admit to something?
Since I'm a hippie, pretty much. If I were in the 70s, I'd be a hippie.
Just since we're admitting stuff, why don't you admit to something?
I always wanted to climb in a kangaroo's pouch.
Just since we're sitting here admitting to stuff, why don't you admit to something?
I admit I had a glass of wine.
Just since we're sitting here admitting to things, can you admit to something?
I can wildly say sex toy great.
Since we're admitting things, we shouldn't admit I kidnapped British kids.
Well, I can admit, free case day keeps the inwards away.
Just since we're admitting to things, why don't you admit to something?
I don't got anything to admit to.
Everybody does.
I don't know what confession why are we confessing?
Why aren't we? Just since we're admitting to things, you want to admit to something?
I suck at driving.
Just since we're admitting to things right now, why don't you admit to something?
Because why would I do that? Because you're some random dude that's sitting up here very ominously that I don't know and probably could care less about.
Just since we're admitting to things right now, why don't you go ahead and admit something?
I cheated on my math test.
Just since we're admitting to stuff, why don't you go ahead and admit something for me here?
Are you that guy that was trying to get people to admit stuff just like, what? No, I think that was you last time, dog. You was like, since we're admitting stuff, why don't you go ahead and admit?
Just since we're admitting to things right now, why don't you go ahead and admit to something?
I admit that I still have feelings for one of my exes that used to be a stripper.
Just since we're sitting here admitting to stuff, why don't you go ahead and admit something for me right now?
I dissolved a fucking unborn baby
Thank you
with
for admitting that.
chloroform, citrons, and as well as with cleaning. Just put them together, just mix it, just put a little bit of acid inside of it, and then just put the baby in there, and nobody will know.
Just since we are admitting to things right now, why don't you go ahead and just admit something for me?
Okay, I just came here to see someone.
Just since we're admitting to things right now, why don't you go ahead and admit something for me?
I killed my best friend's hamster when I was 2.
Just since we're admitting to things, why don't you guys go ahead and admit to something right now?
I'm gay.
What are you admitting to?
I'm breathing.
Just since we're admitting to things right now, can you go ahead and admit to something?
I have a cat.
Just since we are admitting to things, why don't you just go ahead and admit to something for me?
Like, fuck my best friend yesterday?
Just since we're admitting to things, why don't you just go ahead and admit to something?
I'd like fat bitches.
Just since we're admitting to things right now, why don't you go ahead and admit something to me?
I like dead bodies.
Just since we're admitting to things, can you just go ahead and admit to something?
What am I? Oh yeah, I remember you. I don't want to push my sister off the tree when we were kids.
Just since we're admitting to things, can you admit something for me, please?
America took my passport away, so I can't go back to Germany.
Just since we're admitting to things, can you admit something for me, please?
It's my first day on VR.
Just since we're admitting to things, can you admit something?
I fucked your mom last night.
Just since we're admitting to things, can you admit something for me, please?
I find furries attractive.
Well, just since we're admitting things, why don't you go ahead and admit
You
something?
admit something, You admit something.
I beat myself at nighttime, and I record it, and then I watch myself beat myself. Year 10.
I once shoved a whole jar of jelly beans on my ass.
Just since we're admitting stuff, why don't you just go ahead and admit to something for me?
I'm gay.
Just since we're admitting to stuff, why don't you go ahead and admit to something for me, please? Just since we're admitting to things, why don't you go ahead and admit something for me?
I've been kicked from one of these maps before.
Just since we're admitting to things, Why don't you go ahead and admit something?
I didn't know how to tie my shoelaces until I was 15.
Just since we're admitting stuff, just admit anything.
It's like the confession booth. I'm in love with a man that won't date me because he's gonna die soon.
Just since we're sitting here admitting things, why don't you go ahead and admit something?
So I'm still a virgin, but
And just since we're admitting things, why don't you just go ahead and admit something?
Cheating on my test, my criminal justice class.
Just since we're admitting things, why don't you go ahead and admit to something?
I abuse sandpaper.
Just while I have you here, and since we're admitting things, why don't you just go ahead and admit something for me right now?
I abuse for 30s.
Well, just since we're all sitting here admitting to stuff, why don't you go ahead and admit something, Dalton?
Said I hate college.
Why don't you just admit something?
The emissions tax?
Emissions tax.
There's an emissions tax? I don't want to do this no more. I ain't getting taxed on me admitting and shit like that.
Blame Trump.
Admission. I thought you said emission, like carbon emission.
Well, as long as you're admitting something, look at the back of my shirt.
Okay, I was in a depression for like 2 weeks and I've got behind on school. I'm almost failing a class. Or hell, I killed a cow the other day, butchered it for food, got a deer earlier too. Like, the fuck you want me to admit, dude?
Just since we're sitting here admitting to stuff, why don't you go ahead and admit something?
I can't say it. No, you got this. This is a safe space.
I can't say it. It's too...
Just admit it, man.
Painful.
I'm here.
It's too painful.
This is what I do, eh? People admit stuff to me. You can admit it.
I had 4 good friends that I called my brothers, and everything was taken away by this one fucking girl. One fucking girl who caused me pain. Because my friends not only betrayed me by stabbing me in the back, they decided to lie with them. But now they are the ones who are suffering in a jail cell because of me. This because I didn't admit that she was bad news, and they just decided to try to erase me. Always in pain. Always. It makes me think that there's no hope that I'll ever get them to be my friends again. It's been years now. It's been 10 years, and not once they'll tell me that they're going to get out or anything. Probably because they choose to stay there because of what they done. I forgive them. I have forgiven them, but they just think what they did was messed up, and they shouldn't blame them. They shouldn't blame themselves. I was the one who didn't tell them that she was bad news. I could have told them that if you lie with them, I could have seen it coming from a mile away. I could have seen it.
Just since we're admitting things, why don't you go ahead and admit something?
Last year, I kissed Kachan on the lips. It felt good. Really good.
Just since we're sitting here admitting the things, why don't you go ahead and admit something?
Black and white are pretty good colors, but black is quite good. Quite good, I should say.
Just since we're admitting things, why don't you go ahead and admit something?
My penis is 3 inches.
Just since we're admitting stuff, why don't you go ahead and admit something for me right now?
Hi, I'm Midnight. I've been an alcoholic for 102 years. It's a court order. I gotta be here. Wrap my car around a post.
Well, just since we're admitting stuff, Hazy, what do you have to admit?
I'm addicted to butter. If I get chicken wings, I drown in butter.
Just since we're sitting here admitting to stuff, why don't you just go ahead and admit something?
I like it up the ass.
Since we're just sitting here emitting things, why don't you just go ahead and emit something for me right now?
I am only mostly straight.
Well, just since we're sitting here admitting to things, why don't you just go ahead and emit something for me right now?
I'm gonna be vague about this, but I'm kind of a degenerate.
So why don't you just go ahead and admit something for me right now?
In Canada, the people speak English.
Since we're just admitting things, Since we're just admitting things, what do you have to admit?
I have a coochie.
Since we're just admitting stuff, why don't you admit something for me right now?
I'm on your walls. I'm gonna rape you.
If we're just sitting here admitting things, why don't you admit something to me right now?
I'm butt naked right now.
Yo guys, just wanted to say thank you so much for watching the video, and don't forget, let them cook.